Hello and welcome to another off-the-shelf board game review. This week we're going to look at Robinson Crusoe. This is a cooperative worker placement game of resource management, plays from 1 to 4 players, and this is a true 1 to 4 player game, unlike some cooperative games where 1 player is required to play multiple roles. This game does actually have rules for 1 player to play with 1 character only. The game plays for about 2 hours once you're pretty familiar with the rules, and is for ages 14 and up. Robinson Crusoe is a scenario-based game, but there's one universal truth to all the scenarios. You've been shipwrecked and you need to survive on this island, cooperatively, as a team. You either all succeed as one group, or you all fail as a group. Each player is going to take on the role of a survivor, and like I said, this is a true solo player game, so if you do want to play this by yourself with only 1 survivor, there are some extra NPCs included in the game to help you cover the difficulties of playing with only 1 survivor. Players will be required to explore the island and collect resources in an effort to try to survive. The challenge will come with random events that you're going to encounter while you're out exploring the island. Whether those events happen while you're out exploring, foraging for supplies, or building items to help your team survive just a little bit longer on the island. Those items can be items such as shovels, knives, spears, fire pits, or just things that are going to help you survive and stay alive and avoid the challenges that the island is going to be constantly presenting you, such as wild animals that you'll need to hunt just to get food to survive, again, a little bit longer. It's not all doom and gloom though, because while you're out exploring the island you might find random treasures or traps or rabid animals or even an old pirate's pistol left behind on this island. And can you balance gathering supplies, avoiding random events that may be coming at you every single game round, while stopping your survivors from starving to death, avoiding the elements, surviving snowstorms, wild pigs, and everything that could possibly go on this crazy deserted island? If you can do all that and make it through the scenario and survive, you just might win Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe retails for $80, and while that may seem a little bit high on the surface, the game does come with a large variety of components, including customized dice, well over 200 gameplay cards, wooden components for the resources and your cubes and your circlet discs for worker placement, cardboard tokens, and some thick cardboard for the map pieces that you'll be laying on the game board, which is also a really nice and well-designed component also. The game comes with wooden components to represent the resources you'll be gathering while you're adventuring on the game board. It also comes with circular discs that you'll be using as your worker placement pawns to represent where on the board you're going to be exploring, and that'll make more sense when I explain to you actually how to play the game. The game also comes with a couple of cubes that are actually made out of plastic, and while it may seem odd at first to see plastic cubes in a game that already has wooden components in it, I think it was actually a conscious decision on the designer standpoint, because these cubes have a completely different use besides the resource cubes, and I'll get into that again while I explain the game, but basically these are used to track various things like use of abilities, things that occur on the board, and they're basically kept separate from your resources. So I think that was actually a conscious decision on the design part made to make the game play a little bit simpler or easier to grasp or understand. The game also comes with a fair amount of cardboard components. These are basically circular discs, and they have various uses in the game, basically used to track different things such as more challenging events, difficulty of getting things on the board. And again, this will all make more sense when I explain how to play the game. But the cardboard components are good quality. They're not the thickest I've seen, but they're definitely not the thinnest. They're definitely hardy. I've not had any problems with them peeling. Also, the symbols they chose to use are pretty easy to read. For example, the cloud for things that involve weather, the -1 person, it looks like a person, makes you know various things such as if it's more difficult, you need more explorers to do certain things, +1 food. This is also a different symbol, and again, these all make more sense when I explain the game, but they're very easy to read, very decently designed, and pretty good components there too. The game also comes with hexagonal tiles, and these are going to be used to build the island every time you play. It's going to add replay value to the game because the island's going to be laid out differently every time you play the game. And all these cards have a little bit of colorful artwork and symbols on them. Again, the symbols are extremely easy to read. They're not small, minute fonts. Very easy to pick up on, especially when you know how to play the game. You'll start learning these symbols very quickly because they all make sense and they match the rest of the components for the game. For example, you'll notice that the symbol with the tiger head, if you look over here, you'll see it matches the symbol for the card. And the reason why is when this tile comes up, you're going to be drawing this card. Again, really good gameplay design decisions there. The game does come with a lot of cards, well over 200 standard size cards, plus the mini size cards that do come with the game. And these are a good quality card stock. They're very thick. They have a very nice snap to them. These are definitely going to be lasting a while. Shouldn't have any problems with these cards starting to fray or fall apart on you anytime soon. Now, there's not a lot of art on these cards. I'd almost go as far as to say is that they're fairly artistically sparse, especially for the event cards. But when you do find the artwork in the game, it does have a unique style to it, and I think they're trying to convey a theme. You'll look at the art and you'll see it's kind of a black and white drawing, which almost is reminiscent of somebody writing in a journal. And again, this game is Robinson Crusoe, based on people abandoned on an island trying to survive. And I think we've all seen the cliche where somebody's writing in the journal, keeping track of everything as it passes. And that does kind of match with all the components when you start seeing the artwork for the game. Especially for the hunting deck, you look at the animals. They look like drawings you'd actually see inside somebody's journal, especially if they're a decent artist trapped on an island. So again, while there may not be a lot of artwork, I think thematically it does definitely match and fit the game. The game also uses small cards. Again, these are going to be using symbols. They're pretty easy to understand and read. Symbol for the palisades, symbols for you need rope, wood, you need a knife. All the symbols are going to make sense, especially when you learn what the symbology means for the game. Very well designed on that aspect there. Now, I do have one negative about the cards, and it actually coincides with the dice, so I'll come back to it in a moment, but I want to just continue to tell you about the rest of the components here. The game comes with adventurer cards, or call them survivor cards if you like, for every one of the players, and it has a very nice touch. There's a male and a female side for all the adventurer cards. Now, their statistics are exactly the same. Their abilities are exactly the same. It's just a different piece of artwork, which I think is actually a very, very nice touch. You don't see that too often in games. I think Legend of Andor is one of the more recent games that's done it. And it's such a very simple, nice addition to the game, and it would be nice if more games would do it. It's kind of an extra attention to detail, I think. The cardstock on these is a little bit on the thinner side. Not terribly thin as paper, but it's definitely a cardstock versus a cardboard like the rest of the components. Now, I've gotten a lot of play on this game in the past couple weeks, and the edges of these cards are starting to get dinged up a little bit. So after I'm done with my review, I'm actually thinking I'm going to go ahead and laminate this game, just because this game is getting a lot of playtime. Not to spoil the eventual review at the end here, but the game's getting a lot of playtime, and I have a feeling these are going to start getting dinged up just a little bit. So as soon as I'm done recording this video, I'm definitely going to head out to Kinko's, get those laminated. Now, this game is scenario based, and it does come with 6 different scenarios. There's 3 different scenario cards, and they are double-sided with different scenarios, and these scenarios play a lot differently. You think you want to get too much variety from game, which is basically survival on an island, but you have a lot of different scenarios. Every basic castaway scenario, you have your cannibal scenario, you have your haunted island scenario, and they all play differently, and they all offer different challenges. And they're numbered 1 through 6, and they scale in order of difficulty, from number 1 being the easiest to supposedly 6 being the toughest, but I'm starting to think that 4 may be the toughest, but that may be just my luck. Additionally, Z-Man Games has actually released 2 additional free scenarios. You can download those from Z-Man's website, and they're really well designed scenarios. They're actually done by the original person who made the game, and I'm not going to butcher his name because I can't pronounce his name too well, so I'm not going to try that. But go to Z-Man Games website, and you can download those extra 2 scenarios. I've only played around with them. I haven't fully torn into them. I've only given them each one playthrough, but they are definitely fun additional free scenarios to add to the game. Next, we have the rulebook for the game. Now, the rulebook is 20 pages long, and on the back of the book, there is a resource that explains to you what all the symbols used throughout the cards, they all mean throughout the game to help you learn and make the game a lot easier. The rulebook itself is pretty well designed. It goes over most of the rules pretty well. My only complaint with the rulebook is that I think in some areas of the rulebook, there's a little bit of room for interpretation of the rules, and some of the rules can seem a little bit like they could be taken multiple ways. Now, it's not terrible to the point that it's going to be impossible to learn how to play Robinson Crusoe. Overall, though, I think it's a decent rulebook, especially considering how complex this game is. There's a lot going on here. I wouldn't say this game's at the complexity level of something such as Mage Knight, but it's definitely up there in the complexity scale. And I think that's what works against the game with the rulebook. Good rulebook. Unfortunately, there's a couple areas where there's a room for interpretation, which may cause some confusion. Luckily, there's an FAQ available. I think it's about 18 pages long. Well, I think a lot of the questions are over-asked and probably unnecessary. There are some good questions that are asked and clarified in the FAQ. Finally, the game does come with 12 customized dice, and thankfully, because these are customized dice, these dice are engraved. So you don't have to worry about the symbols rubbing off on them anytime soon, and they're actually engraved pretty deeply, not very shallow engraving. It's actually done pretty nicely there. You don't have to worry about these dice losing their symbols anytime soon, which is an unfortunate thing when they simply just paint the symbols on the dice. We all know what happens. They rub off and the dice become useless. And we have to buy new ones, which is a difficulty whenever you have a game with customized dice. And these dice are high quality. They're good standard sized dice. They roll really well. They got a good heft to them. No problems with them. I like them. They're standard dice size, but they're good. But I do have one minor complaint with the dice, and this goes back in what I bypassed earlier with the cards. These dice do require you to be able to differentiate colors. Now, I personally did not have this issue, but it was brought up to me by another player that they can't differentiate some of the colors of the dice. And you notice that the colors of the dice match the colors of the cards. Green dice with green cards, brown dice, brown cards, gray dice with dark grayish cards. Anytime you're going to have an event from this deck, you're going to be rolling these dice. From this deck, these dice, and same with the green. Now the trick is these dice have different success ratios, so they're not interchangeable. You can't roll the green dice for the black because there's different amount of hearts on them, which represent wounds, and some of them have different encounters, which is a question mark, so different ratios of those. So the dice are not interchangeable. So if you're playing Robinson Crusoe, unless you're going to take a Sharpie marker and mark each one of these with a G or a B or a gray to mark them, you do need to be able to differentiate between the different colors. Luckily with the cards, it's not as big of a deal because they do have a symbol for them. If you notice, you have a hammer for building, you have a telescope for exploring, and finally you have I call it a cauldron to cook food in for your out gathering resources deck. Now, like I said, for me it wasn't a big deal, but for somebody who has different abilities and differentiating colors, it could be quite a challenge. And there's also one more area where this also creeps up, and these are two different event cards with, if you're able to differentiate, there are two different color backs for two event cards. And these different colors are important and they do matter, so you do have to be able to differentiate between these cards. There are only 3 cards with this darker blue back in the game, so if you differentiate them and you can't tell the difference in colors, you can mark them pretty easily so you can find them at a future date. But again, that's going to go with that ability to differentiate colors. If you cannot differentiate, you may have a little difficulty with this when you start playing the game. Finally, the game does come with a very good quality game board, and I like how they designed the game board. Now, you won't be able to see it from the camera there, but you're going to notice that all the different sections of the board have numbers on them, which is a nice reminder and teaches you how to play the game. For example, you'll see the resource space has a number 3 on it because it happens the 3rd phase of the game. And if I flip the board over, you'll see that the number 1 space shows that you're going to handle an exploration card, and this is where the exploration cards come from. The number 2 right here is the 2nd phase, which is your morale track, and this goes around all across the board. And there's also a nice turn reminder right here, so you get double the turn reminders, which is a nice addition to the game. It really helps new players learn the game, especially if they know that little trick about the game board. Overall, I'm satisfied with the price to quality of components ratio of Robinson Crusoe, especially if you enjoy the game. At this point, and I know this is personal, a matter of opinion, I like the game. So at this point, my dollar per hour ratio is way down in the single digits with this game because the game has multiple scenarios. But I could see somebody saying that $80 may be a little bit on the high range for this game. I think it may have attracted more buyers at the $60 or $70. And while I think that may have been a little bit harder for Z-Man Games to meet that price point, considering all the cards, the quality of the dice, and the quality of other components, I think that may be the only hurdle some people may have before they take the plunge with Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe is a scenario-based game, and while the game does come with 6 different scenarios, they all do play differently. I'm going to go ahead and instruct you how to play the game, showing you the very first scenario, which is Castaways. Now, the requirement for Castaways for victory condition is you need to build the invention of fire, which starts right here, and it's one of the starting inventions that every player starts with when you start the game. Additionally, the player is going to be required to gather 15 pieces of wood by the end of the 12th turn. The players are unable to do this by the end of the 12th turn, and all 12 turns represent months, so you're basically trying to survive 1 year on this island and get rescued. The players can get 15 stacks of wood and build the fire. They're going to win by the 12th turn. If they're unable to do this by the 12th turn, or at any time one of the players dies, all the players are going to lose. Now, Robinson Crusoe is pretty quick and easy to set up, but there are a few things you have to do. First, there's the obvious thing where you need to shuffle all the individual decks separately. Then you have to deal out the 9 starting inventions. Now these 9 inventions are going to be present every time you play the game, unless the scenario says otherwise. And the way you denote these different inventions is if you look next to their name, you're going to see these little double arrows next to it, kind of forming a kind of a bracket. Now there's only 9 invention cards that have it. If you look at the rest of the invention cards next to their name, they do not have it. So that denotes the invention cards that you actually start the game with. Next you're going to have the starting tile, and now the starting tile may be different for different scenarios, but for the castaways, the beach is the first starting scenario, and you're going to take your tent token with the X side up, and this is an error in the rulebook. The rulebook tells you to do this, which is wrong. You actually want to start with the X side up because you haven't actually built your shelter yet. That's going to signify whichever tile your party is currently on. Next you're going to need to build the event deck. Now the event deck is going to be made out of a certain amount of cards based on the scenario. And it may sound confusing, but it really isn't. You're going to take half the amount of turns for the game, and you're going to take event cards for one deck representing that half, and event cards for another half. And basically the short version is there's event cards that have a book symbol on them, and then there are event cards which have a question mark, which will be in one of 3 different colors. It's either going to be green, brown, or gray. You're basically going to randomly dig and get cards from each one of these stacks. In an overcomplex way, I'm basically saying if you have a scenario that goes through 12 turns, you're going to need 6 cards from this stack, 6 cards from this stack. Half of 12 is 6. If you have a scenario that's 10 rounds, you're going to take 5 from each stack. If you have a scenario that's 9, you're going to take 5 from each because you need to have at least the minimum plus 1, so it'll be 10 at that point. Basically, you're going to take these decks, shuffle them up, randomly take cards from each stack, and then you're going to shuffle them together to form your event deck. Once your event deck is formed, the rest of these event cards are removed from the game and they're not used. Now that's a lot of cards that are not used throughout the game, so that's part of the replay value of this game, which I think is very cool, but these cards are not going to be used. Your event deck is going to be the 12 cards you're going to form from making that draw deck. This is the morale. Everybody starts with 0 morale, unless of course the scenario tells you otherwise. It can start at 0, and this is going to be tracked. Morale can never go below -3, can never go above 2 plus a heart. Next you're going to need to take one of these little black cubes, which is going to be on your weapon track. It starts at the 0 space on the weapon track. You do not put any cubes here yet. This area of the board is once you built your shelter, and we haven't done that at the start of the game, so we're going to ignore this part of the board for now. Finally, we're going to take our starting event card. Now your starting event card is one of the cards I showed you earlier that have the different colored back, and there's only 3 of them in the game. Castaway scenario starts with the event card called Food Crates, and that's going to start on your event track on this side. Now it's very important that all your event track starts on this side because these cards are going to be sliding this way throughout the game. And as they slide out the board, good or bad things, mostly bad things are going to start happening to you. So event cards always start in this space, and when they're drawn they're also going to go in this space. And if there's any cards in this space, it's going to force whatever card's there to slide over. So if we draw an event card, and I don't want to show this one yet, this one's going to slide over, and we're going to take care of that event card. Next one's going to force them to slide over, etc. like that, and that's how the event deck is going to run through. The other thing you're going to need to do is you're going to have to shuffle your discovery tokens. Now I personally, when I'm playing with the game, I use an opaque cup. I put all the discovery tokens in them, so I just draw out pardon me, I just draw out from there randomly. I don't like to show components that don't actually come with the game when I'm showing you how to play a game because I don't think it's fair, so I'm not going to have an opaque cup, but I personally use an opaque cup or just a cloth bag for those. Once you have all the decks shuffled up and put in their spaces, the exploration deck, the resource finding deck, and also the building deck, each player needs to pick one of their survivors that they're going to play throughout the game. Now in a 3-player game, you're not allowed to pick the soldier. The soldier is only available in a 4-player game. In a 3-player game, you're only allowed to pick from the explorer, the carpenter, or the cook. Additionally, in a 3-player game, if you want to make the game easier, you're allowed to add the dog to your team, which gives you an extra explorer who's going to help you on explorer actions and also hunting actions. And in a 2-player game, you have access to Friday. Now he's a reduced strength player. He's controllable by all the players. Well, the rules say that the starting player controls him, but you're playing this game as a group anyway, so I'm pretty sure you're all going to decide as a group exactly what Friday's going to do. Friday has a reduced strength character, but he doesn't have all the weaknesses the players do. He doesn't need to eat, and he doesn't suffer from the elements. And again, he's only used in a 2-player game. Or I guess you could use him in a 3-player game if you want to make the game very easy. Additionally, each survivor is going to have one item that they're specially or invention that they're allowed to build. The soldier is allowed to build the spear, and additionally, if he does, or she does in this case, manages to build a spear, she's actually going to get inspiration tokens. Now, what inspiration tokens are is they're tokens that allow you to power your special abilities. Each survivor has 4 unique special abilities that cost inspiration tokens, anywhere from 2 to 3 in strength. The more powerful ones are going to take 3 inspiration tokens. You can get inspiration tokens from various means, such as if your morale track is higher, you can get them for free, or surviving special events is going to give you inspiration tokens also. Inspiration tokens can be spent at any time, just not in the direct middle of an action. So you can't flip over an event card and say, oh, this is a bad event, I'm going to use one of my inspiration token abilities. But you can use them anytime during any phase of the game. You simply spend them and then you get the effect of the ability. Finally, each player's life is going to be tracked by the life track at the bottom. Now, once a player's life track reaches the skull and crossbones, that player is dead and all the players have lost the game at that point. Additionally, you're going to notice these little arrow symbols on various levels of the life track. Now, these arrow symbols are not part of the life track, so if you take one wound, you actually bypass the arrow and go to the next heart. What these arrows signify is if you look over the morale track, you're going to notice that the arrow is the same thing, and it matches the direction. So if your life goes below this point with the arrow, your morale track, and this morale track affects all the players, is going to go down 1 level. If your life goes down again, you're going to lose 1 more point of morale. Now here's the extra challenging trick with the morale track. If you take a wound that takes you below the morale track arrow and you drop a level on the morale track, and then you happen to heal, your morale does not go back up. This is a one-way track. Even if you heal past the arrow, your morale is not going to go back up. Additionally, if you take a wound again, going past that same arrow you've already bypassed 1 time, your morale level is going to go down an additional level. So you have to be very cautious when you're doing your healing and make sure you're not healing somebody who has the potential to take another wound again, because you're going to get a double hit on your morale track. Now, there's 2 other randomizers you have when you play the game, when you're setting up the game, I should say. The next randomizer you're going to have is there are 8 different starting items that the players can start with, and this is going to be randomized every time they play the game. The players simply take the deck of the randomized items, take 2 of the items, and those are their starting items that they get, and the rest of the cards are discarded for the rest of the game. Now, these items are used twice only, and once they're used, they're discarded. You can't recharge them. And to track that, you're going to put black cubes on top of the crates. Every time you use the special ability of this card, you're going to discard one of these tokens, and once you've discarded the last token, the item is removed from the game. Additionally, there's going to be some randomized inventions that you're going to add to your starting invention list. Now remember, there's always these 9 inventions that you always start with every time you play the game. Plus, you're going to get 5 additional inventions. Now, these cards are double-sided, so it's kind of hard to shuffle them and get random ones. I basically just shuffle a couple times and then grab the 5 from the bottom, and those will be my 5 that I'm going to add to my starting inventions. These are then placed to the side because there are cards and abilities that allow you to draw more of these. But you're going to take these extra 5 inventions and you're going to add them to your potential inventions that you can build throughout the game. Now, that's a fairly long-winded setup for a game that is actually pretty easy to play. Robinson Crusoe, once you understand how to play, is not that difficult. The game is played throughout 6 phases, and each complete rotation of all 6 phases is going to be a complete game turn. Now, it's not each individual player is going to take all 6 of these phases. All 6 of these phases are going to affect all the players at one time. And as a matter of fact, when the players are moving, the players are all going to be moving simultaneously, discussing their actions at the same time and deciding the best actions for the entire group to survive. And then once all the players have made their decisions on what actions they're actually going to take, they're all going to suffer the results or the bonuses and boons of their actions pretty much together as a group. Now, the 6 phases for the game is the first phase is going to be the event phase, where the players are going to have to take a random card from the event deck and do as the event deck instructs. The next thing that's going to happen is the morale track. The person who's currently the first player, and the first player is tracked with this card, and this is going to switch at the end of every turn. So once one player is the first player, this is going to basically pass, the next player is going to be the first player on the next turn, and so on around the game. Anyways, the first player is going to suffer the effects of the morale track. The morale check is in the negatives. The player, and only the first player, has to discard that many inspiration tokens. If they're unable to discard that many inspiration tokens, they're going to take wounds. Or if they're in the positive, they're going to gain that many inspiration tokens all the way up to the final level where they can choose to take 2 inspiration tokens or heal 1 wound. After the morale phase, you're going to get your resource gathering phase. Now the resources you're going to gain, and there's 2 tracks on the resource gathering phase, and it's very important to understand the differences between them. These are resources that you've gathered throughout part 4 of the turn. These are resources that are available for you to use right here and right now. Anyways, the amount of resources you're going to gain in your current available resources is going to be based on the tile that your encampment is currently built on. For example, to show you in the starting game, everybody's going to start on the beach, and the beach produces 1 wood and 1 food. Now there's 2 different symbols for food. Overall, they don't mean much, and the only reason why there's 2 different symbols is for various encounters and event cards are going to matter. Some are going to show you a fish symbol, and others are going to show you a bird symbol. Now understand that both these symbols, they both mean food, so they don't mean anything different, but it's going to matter for some of the event cards. So the resources you're going to get is going to be based on the tile you're on. So if your party is currently on this tile right here, on the resource gathering phase, you're going to gain 1 wood and 1 food. And those are symbolized by the brown token for wood and the yellow token for food. Now there's an additional food token, which is orange food, and you're only going to get orange food if a card instructs you to. Now the difference between orange food and yellow food is orange food does not go bad. Now at the end of every game turn, all yellow food, unless you have a card that prevents this from happening, such as the cellar, all yellow food is going to go bad. So it doesn't matter if you have 5, 6, 7 extra pieces of food. If it's yellow tokens, they go bad. If they're orange tokens, they don't go bad. So the yellow tokens will be discarded. After the production phase, we get to the part of the turn where the players are going to plan their actions. And now this is where I said earlier, the players do not take their turns one at a time. They're going to take all their actions on the group. And they're going to resolve their actions by using these worker placement cubes. Now each player is going to get 2 cubes in their color, and you're going to place these discs at various locations on the board signifying what action you're going to take that turn. Now each one of these discs is going to be placed depending on what you want to do. For example, if you want to handle the event card, and you definitely want to handle the event card, especially since some of them have some very bad consequences if you don't, you simply place your disc on the event space to let everybody know that's what you're going to be handling. Now some event cards will allow you to place 1 or 2 of your action tokens, and the results are going to differ depending if you put 1 or 2, and some of them are going to require you to put 1 or 2 on there. And that'll actually be signified on the card. For example, you see this one requires you to have 2 workers and at least a level 2 in your weapon track to at least handle this event card, whereas opposed to this one right here only requires you to place 1 worker to take care of this event card. Players can also place their action discs on the hunt track, and now you'll see that it shows 2 people here, which means it takes 2 people for every attempt at a hunt. Now you can only hunt if you've managed to get cards placed on the hunting location. Now the only way to get cards on the hunting location is if you manage to turn over tiles that happen to have the symbol that tells you to draw one of the hunting cards. And if you do so, you're simply going to grab the animal deck, and you're going to take one of the cards, you're going to add it to the hunting deck. And once you've done that, you can take the hunting action. But until you've done that, you cannot take the hunting action, which basically means for the first turn, nobody can take the hunting action. Next we have the build, the resource gathering, or the exploration actions. Now you notice that each one of these spaces shows either a 1 or 2 worker, 1 or 2 worker, 1 or 2 workers. Now what that means is you can place only 1 worker to do that action, but if you only decide to use 1 action to attempt that action, you're actually going to have to roll dice to see if you succeed. Whereas opposed, if you have 2 workers, you automatically always succeed at that action, and you don't have to roll these dice unless there's a card in play that tells you you have to. And now that we're at the point with explaining the dice, I might as well go ahead and show you these dice. Now there's 3 different dice, and you're going to roll all 3 of these every time the game requires you to do it. One die is going to show you whether you succeed or fail. One is going to show you if you take a wound or not. And the final 3rd card is going to tell you if you're going to have to draw a card or not, and possibly have extra repercussions for your action. So there's two symbols on the success dice. There's either a V, which stands for call it victory if you like, or there's a symbol which shows two circles with plus signs inside them. If you get that symbol, you have actually failed at the action, but you get 2 inspiration tokens to add to your character. If you get the V, you're going to succeed. If you get what looks like a heart that looks like it's been damaged, you're going to take 1 wound. Or the alternate is a blank space, which means no wound. And finally, you're going to get the question mark or a blank space. Now again, if you get the question mark, you have to draw the card that goes with it, suffer the actions or the consequences, and possibly this card will be added to the event deck. It'll actually will be shuffled in, which means that card may come up again to haunt you again, and it'll have to be drawn on top of any event cards that you have to draw for that turn. So that adds a little bit to the challenge of the game. Now when you're actually taking the build action, you're not actually placing your workers on this space. You're actually going to place them where you're deciding to build. So if you're deciding to build the tent, which is your structure for safety, which you're definitely going to want to do so you don't take damage every round, you're going to place 1 worker or 2 workers. Again, if you put 2 workers there, you're automatically going to succeed. If you place 1 worker, you're going to have to roll the dice, try to succeed, and possibly have an encounter and possibly take damage. If you want to build the roof, you place your worker there on the roof. If you want to build the palisade, you place your worker on the palisades. If you want to upgrade your weapon level, you place your worker on the weapon. Additionally, if you want to try to build one of these inventions, you simply place your worker on the invention you want to build. Here's the trick though. You cannot build an invention unless you have the resources, and those resources include discovering certain location tiles on the board. Now when the game first begins, everybody has only discovered the beach, which means you can only build items that have the beach symbol. There's the beach, the hills, the grasslands, the mountains, and also the river spaces. So until I have actually discovered a tile that has grasslands on it, I cannot build the cure, and I also cannot build the rope. Until I've discovered a location tile that has mountains on it, you cannot build the fire and you cannot build the knife. So the game does force you to go out there and make sure you explore. Additionally, some of these resources will also require you to have, some of these inventions will require you to have resources. For example, to build the dam, you have to have discovered one of the location tiles that actually has a river space on it. There's the river space right there. Additionally, you have to actually make sure you have at least 1 wood in your current resources box. It cannot be in your future resources box. It has to be in your current resources box. And you simply, if you discover that tile, you place your worker there, you put the wood over there, and then you're going to attempt to build the dam. If you have 2 workers there, you're automatically going to succeed, as I said before. If you only have 1 worker, you're going to have to roll the dice and see if you succeed. Now if you fail to build the dam, the resources are not lost and they return to your current resources box. So it's not a complete waste, but you do have to suffer the consequences of a failed roll and possibly any cards that may happen from your failed action. Now to track which inventions you can and you can't build, they suggest you use these black cubes and you put it on top of the space up here representing the symbol on the map tile that allows you to build it. Now since every game starts with the island, you're going to start with a black cube on top of the shovel, letting you know that you build the shovel from the start of the game. Once you've discovered a mountain space, you're going to take one of these black cubes, place it on all of the hill cards that require the hills to be built, just as a nice reminder, just to let you know that you can now build those items. The next thing players can do is they can decide to go out and try to get additional resources. Now you can only get resources from spaces adjacent to the space where your current camp is, whether your camp has been built and turned into a structure, or if your camp is unbuilt, you can still only go and get resources from spaces where your camp is not. Now the additional trick to that is you can only go so many spaces away from your base camp. It takes a minimum of 1 worker to go 1 space away, and again you're going to have to roll the dice to see if you succeed on your explore action. Your resource gathering action. Of course, you can always put 2 workers on that space to make sure you guarantee a success and you don't need to roll the dice. Or you can go an additional space away, which is going to cost you an additional worker. So if you go an additional space away, you can use 2 workers to go 2 spaces away. You'll still have to roll the dice. Or if you get a 3rd worker out there, that's going to guarantee a success and you're not going to have to roll the dice. But that is as far as you can go for the resource gathering. Now when you do your resource gathering, you need to make sure you put your workers on the resource you're actually trying to grab. Now that's very important because some of these negative cards will cause things like some of those resources to dry up. So you need to decide if you're going for food or if you're going for wood. And you can only get one of that resource, even if you have 3 people out there working. If they're working together, they all go after the same resource. If they're not working together, then they can actually go for different resources, as long as you're not breaking the rules of distance. So in this example, the cook would be going after food, and he'd have to roll dice. In this example, the cook and the carpenter are working together for food, and they'd have to roll dice, so there's only 2 of them going for it. Now what you could do is you could do something like this. In this example, the cook would be going for 1 food and would have to roll the dice. The cook and the carpenter are going after 1 food and would have to roll the dice. And in here, the explorer is using 2 workers to go after wood and would have to roll 2 dice. The next action you do is the explore action. Now if you're going to explore, you're basically going to put your workers on the spaces where you want to explore. And now exploring follows the same rules as gathering resources. If you have 2 workers going to an adjacent space next to your camp, automatic success. 1 worker is going to require a roll of the dice. If you go up to 2 spaces away from your base camp, you're going to need at least 2 workers and you'll have to roll the dice to succeed. Or if you use 3 workers, it's going to be an automatic success. And you're simply going to, once that comes across, if you succeed, and only if you succeed, you're going to draw 1 of the tiles from the tile stack, flip it over, and that's going to be placed in the space where you're doing your exploration. You're going to look at the symbol of the tile you just drew, and we're going to see that we got mountains. So we're going to find all our inventions that require mountains, put the square cube on it to let us know that we can now build those inventions on future turns by taking the build action. Now once all the players have agreed on where they're going to be placing their workers and what exactly they're going to be doing and what kind of success ratio they're going to be going for, once all the players have agreed on what actions they're going to be doing for that round, it's now to go to the resolve phase. Now everything is resolved in a specific order. You're going to resolve everything in the order of event card, hunt, build, looking for resources, and exploration. Now to resolve the event card, you're basically going to read the event card and do exactly what it tells you. In this instance, this card says if you place 2 workers here, you're going to gain 2 food. And that's going to go in your future resources space. Now this is very, very important. These tokens go in future resources space because you're gaining these. You got to imagine that all these actions are happening simultaneously. So if that helps you remember, just think everything's happening simultaneously here. So any resources we're getting on this resolution phase go in the future resources space. They're not available for everybody else to use until the end of the resolution. So once we resolve the event card, it is removed from the board and we don't have to worry about its negative consequences. We then move to the hunt location. We don't have anybody hunting, so we're going to move to the build action. And it doesn't matter what order we handle our builds, we can handle in any order we like. We're going to go ahead and take the shovel build action. And since we only have 1 explorer here, we're going to need to roll the dice. In this instance, and you handle the dice in wound order, success order, adventure card order. So in this instance, I would have taken 1 wound, and then I have to see if my morale is going to go down if I've taken enough wounds. Then I'm going to see that I succeeded, which means I am going to successfully build a shovel, and it's going to go into the future available resources space. We can't use it yet because it doesn't actually exist yet. And we're going to turn it face down to signify that it's actually been built. And then finally, we're going to have to suffer from the adventure deck. We're going to draw the top card from the adventure deck, follow what it says on the top right here, and it says, this one says, shuffle into the event deck, and then when this card comes back up, we're going to have to suffer some kind of consequence when this card comes back up. So we simply take this card, shuffle it into the event deck, and I'm actually going to cheat and place it on top because I want to show you why in a second here. Place it on top, and then we are done with this player's action. Then we're going to move this player's action. They're going to spend the 1 wood they had to increase their weapon level by 1. And then this 1 wood resource is going to be discarded because it is used now. And that's the end of all our player actions. Now everything has been resolved. Once everything has been resolved, All our future resources move into our current resources space. So now this food is going to be available for the later phases of this turn, and the shovel is now available, and then all these action tokens are going to be returned to the players so they can reallocate them later date. Now there's two other action spaces I didn't show you that are available to the players, but I didn't show them to you because they're actually pretty simple. If somebody places a worker on this space right here, they're going to gain 2 inspiration, and the morale track is going to go up by 1 level. And that's going to be a permanent increase unless something causes it to decrease, such as wounds or cards or any kind of event. And then you have this space down here, which basically allows you to heal 1 wound. Now you can place as many workers as you want in that space, so you can heal 2 wounds by going there. Or you can place 2 workers here to gain 4 inspiration in 2 movements on the morale track. Once all the resolution has been done, you're going to move on to the 5th phase. And again, remember how I was showing you, all these phases are marked in case you forget. The 5th phase, you can see the number 5 here, is going to be the weather phase. Now the weather phase is going to vary depending on the scenario. And in the castaway scenario, the first 3 rounds there's going to be not going to be any weather problems unless you get a bad event card. In the 4th round, there's going to be a roll from the orange weather die. And starting in the 7th round, you're going to have to roll all 3 of the dice here, plus any event cards that may tell you to do additional rolls. Now these dice have certain different results you can get. You're going to see that there's a rain cloud. Let me see if I can get the camera to focus here. There's a rain cloud, there's a double rain cloud, and there's also what looks like a winter snowflake cloud. Now the amount of clouds on these matter. They're very, very important. They're going to use to determine how much damage and how many resources the player is going to lose by trying to survive through the elements. And I'll get to the weather in just a second. I want to make sure I show you the red die. Now the red die is also going to cause you a lot of problems. You're going to see that what looks like a skull with number 3 is the player's going to have to face a level 3 beast. You're going to see this symbol right here, which means they're going to reduce the palisades level by 1, and then finally they're going to have to discard 1 food, which is going to be removed out of their current available supply space. Now going back to the weather die. Now the weather die is going to cause a lot of challenges in this phase if you have not built your shelter, which means you do not have a roof, which means you don't have any palisades. Now one of the main themes in Robinson Crusoe to add to the challenge is if you cannot meet a requirement for something that happens in the game, players are going to start taking wounds, and that's the challenge that really is going to start pushing the players to really try to do everything they can to try to survive in this game. And it's going to be really, really apparent when you start rolling the weather dice. When the players roll the weather dice, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to look for winter clouds, which are signified by the snowflakes. Now for every winter cloud they roll, they're going to have to discard 1 wood token from the current available resources space. If they cannot do that, the players are going to take damage. After the players have discarded the wood for each one of the snowflakes represented on the dice that they managed to roll, they have to add up however total many clouds they actually have on the dice. So it doesn't matter if it's a snowflake cloud or a rain cloud, that's the total amount of clouds that they have. Then they count up that many of clouds and compare it to their current roof level. Now if your roof level is at 0 and you have 3 clouds, you need to discard that many wood and that many food. So if you have 3 clouds and your roof level is 0, you're going to need to discard 3 food and 3 wood. If your roof level is at 2, 3 minus 2 is 1, you have to discard 1 food and 1 wood. For each resource that you're unable to discard from your available resources space, every single player is going to take 1 point of damage. So if our roof level is at 1 and we have 3 clouds, we need to discard 2 wood and 2 food. And since we can't meet that requirement, we're going to discard 1 wood and 1 food, and we have 2 resources unpaid for the elements, so every player is going to take 2 points of damage. And that goes for every player, not just one player. Every player is going to take that damage. Finally, after we're done with the weather phase, we're going to move on to the night phase. Now there's 3 actions we get to do at the night phase. The first action we get to do is we get to move our camp if we want to. And the main reason why we may want to move our camp is if some of the resources on the tile we're on manage to get worn or completely worn out, which means that resource is no longer available for the rest of the game. And that'll happen because of event cards. So we may want to move our camp. Now if your camp is built, which means you've managed to switch over to the tent side, you're going to lose part of your roof and part of your palisades when you move your camp. If it has not been built, you're not going to lose anything from your roof or your palisades at all. But if you haven't built your camp, you're going to start suffering from the elements. After you've decided if you are or are not going to move your camp to a different tile, the next thing you have to do is you have to feed each explorer that you have on your team. So in a 3-player game, you're going to need 3 food. For every player who is unable to eat or consume a food cube, which is going to be removed from your available resources space, that player who is unable to eat is going to take 2 points of damage. Additionally, if you have not built your shelter yet, every player is going to take 1 point of damage for not having a shelter and having to suffer from the elements. Finally, once you've handled all the eating and the covering of the elements, any yellow cubes that you have left in your available resources space are discarded and removed from the game unless you have an item such as a cellar or an event card that's allowing you to keep food resources, or if you have orange food resources which represents food that does not go bad at the end of every game turn. Now there's just a couple extra concepts you need to understand about Robinson Crusoe before I can actually get into playing the game. First, and one of the most important concepts to understand, is players can only heal during the night phase unless it's a special ability that gives you the ability to heal out of phase. For example, such as the cook's inspiration ability to spend 3 inspiration to heal 1 wound. That can be used during any phase, but most of the healing abilities can only be used during the night phase. A good example of that being the pot. Once you have built the pot or built the invention of the pot, you can spend 1 food to heal 1 heart. That can only be done during the night phase. And additionally, that's in addition to any food that you have to pay to feed your survivors. So when you use this food, it's not the food that they're eating. You have to discard additional food on top of what they're eating during the night phase to heal that 1 heart. And this pot is only usable 1 time per turn, so you can only heal 1 heart. You can't discard like 5 food to heal 5 hearts. It's 1 heart for 1 food. The next thing to understand about the game is you cannot build a roof or palisades until you have built your little hut here, unless you're on a space that has a hut on it, which is the symbol of the tent. Now that means if you're on this space and your camp is on the space, even if your camp has not, or I should say your shelter has not been built, this space technically counts as a shelter, which basically means you found a cave or some on that space. If you move off of this space, your shelter does not move with you. The shelter only exists on that space. So if you haven't built your shelter and you move off of this space, your shelter no longer exists and you're again tasked with building the shelter. But if you have built your shelter and you move to a space with a shelter, nothing happens, and if you move off the space, your shelter is still built. Basically, once your shelter is built, it exists for the rest of the game. Nothing will take it away. But if your shelter is not built, you only have shelter on these spaces that have the shelter symbol. Next, the amount of resources it's going to cost to build your shelter, raise your roofs, and raise your palisades is going to depend on the number of players. Now, in a 2-player game, it's going to cost 2 wood or 1 fir. And you cannot mix and match. You can't do 1 fir, 2 wood. Not that you'd want to here. But in the 3-player game, it's going to cost 3 wood, 2 fir. You can't do 1 fir, 2 wood for a total of 3. It's either 3 wood or 2 firs. In a 4-player game, it's 4 wood and 3 firs, and that is per level. So if you were playing a 4-player game and your roof is currently at level 1, and you want to go from level 1 to level 2, you have to spend at least 1 worker on the space, and then you have to discard either 4 wood or 3 firs to raise the level up 1 level. Now, to raise up your weapons level, it costs 1 wood per level of the weapon. Additionally, there are some inventions that will raise your weapon level. Now, these inventions are a one-time use, so once they've raised the level, it's a permanent raise, but you're going to flip the card over to signify that's been done, so you know that that raise can actually, I guess the good term to use here is to disappear or be destroyed. And basically what I mean by that is if you do build a knife, you're going to raise your weapon level by 1. But if something causes your weapon level to go down 1 level, it still happens. The fact that you built the knife doesn't stop that. And as a matter of fact, you can't build the knife a second time. So it's basically a one-time bonus only. Once the knife has been built, you get that +1 weapon bonus, and you can never build it again. So it's a one-time shot to raise your weapon level by 1. But if anything reduces your weapon level, it doesn't matter that you built the knife. Your weapon level still goes down, and your weapon level can actually go back down to 0 even though you've built the knife. Another example of that would be the spear. If you build the spear, it's going to temporarily, or I shouldn't say temporarily, it's going to raise your weapon level by 3 levels. So if you build the spear and it comes down to your available resources space, it's going to come out here under your built inventions, face down to signify that you've done it, and your weapon level is going to go up 3 levels. Now if an event or an action or a hunt causes your weapon level to drop by 3, you're going to go back down to 0, again, even though you built the spear already. Now the only caveat to that is items such as the pistol, which say gives you a temporary bonus to your weapon level. And what that does is that temporary bonus does not count towards your weapon track. So if you have this, and let's say your weapon track is at level 2, and you need to fight an animal that's a strength of 5, and I'm about to explain the animals in just a moment here, you can spend one of these tokens to temporarily raise your weapon level by 3 to bring it to 5. Now you don't adjust this at all. You just remember 3 plus 2 is 5, so your weapon level is temporarily at 5, but your real actual level is still level 2. Now it seems kind of odd that you do that, but it's very important to remember that's how the weapon level works. And you have to remember that because that's going to affect how some of these adventure cards and these event cards are going to play out. Just remember that difference between temporary and permanent weapon level. Now while we're on the topic of the hunting of the animals, I might explain that to you. Every time you pull up a location space that's going to have one of the symbols of the hunting cards, you're going to add one of these cards to the hunting deck. You do not look at it, so you do not know what kind of animal you get to hunt. As a matter of fact, if you add more animals, every time you add an additional animal, you're going to reshuffle the deck. If you add an additional animal, you're going to reshuffle the deck, and again, you don't look at the animals, so you never know what's available to hunt. When you encounter and decide to go hunting, it's going to cost you 2 workers per hunt, so you could actually technically spend 2 sets of 2 workers to do 2 hunts. You're going to decide who is going to go first, and that first player is going to take the first hunt, and you're going to flip over the top card. Now the first number you're going to see is the amount that your weapon level must be at to hunt this animal without taking wounds. Now if your weapon level is not that level, you still succeed in your hunt, but you're going to take damage. Now it's only the player doing this hunt who takes this damage, not every person, and you're going to take an amount of damage based on the difference between this level and your current weapon level. So if your weapon level is currently at 2 and you're hunting a 3 strength creature, this player is going to take 1 point of damage. Next, their weapon level is going to permanently go down by 1 level from 2 to 1, and then they're going to gain 2 food, and this is the yellow food, not the orange food, which will go bad at the end of the turn, and that'll go in their future available resources space. And they're also going to get 1 hide, which will go in their future available space, resources space. Then this card is removed from the hunt. Then the next player is going to go on the hunt, and they're going to take the top hunt card, and they're going to encounter it. Now this card is going to be a jaguar, which is a 5 strength, gives 4 food and 1 hide, and has an additional effect that says if you do not have the cure, which is this invention, discovered, you're going to gain an additional 2 wounds. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare the 5 strength of the jaguar to our current weapon level of 1. So whichever player is taking this hunt action, which is an example is explore, they're going to take 4 points of damage, and since we have not discovered the cure, they're going to take 2 more points of damage for a total of 6 points of damage, which I can guarantee you is going to be a hit on the morale track. Then they're going to gain 4 food, again in the future resources space, and they're going to gain 1 hide, again in the future resources space. And then this card is removed. That's how hunting is handled. And finally, remember that adventure card that we added to our event deck? Well, remember at the start of every turn, we're going to turn over the top adventure or the event card. Now, the event card is an adventure card. We're going to resolve its effect, whichever it may be. We're going to handle whatever the card tells us to do. We're going to discard that card, and then we need to draw the next card on top. Now, if the next card on top is another adventure card, we're going to have to handle whatever it says and draw again. Now, we keep drawing until we get an actual event card, and then we're going to handle what it says, which means we can actually, if we had a lot of bad luck on prior turns and we got a couple of these adventure cards, we can go through a couple of these adventure cards before we ever get to an event card, which can cause a lot of bad things to happen. Now when you turn over an event card, I'm going to add a second one here just for this example here in just a second, but when you turn over an event card, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look at the top and you're going to look for a symbol. It's either going to have a book or a question mark. Now if it has a book symbol, you're going to have to look at the scenario card. It'll tell you what the book symbol does. In the castaway scenario, it does nothing, so it's actually a little bit of grace there. Nothing bad is going to happen to you. If you manage to get an event card that has one of these question marks on it, these are going to be color coded. You have a gray, green, or brown. You're going to take one of these question marks that matches the color, and you're going to put it on top of its respective deck. Now what this means, now remember before when I told you whenever you do this kind of event, if you have 2 explorers, you're automatically going to succeed. Well, if you have one of these question marks there, even though you succeeded and you didn't need to roll the dice at all, you're still going to have to draw the top card, and that's because this question mark is there. You have to do it. Now if you only put 1 explorer there, you're still going to have to roll the dice, and even if you get a question mark, you're only going to draw 1 card, and this is going to go away. You never draw 2 adventure cards, but as long as this token is there, you're going to draw a card no matter what. The difference is that if you have 2 explorers, you're going to succeed without a roll of the dice. If you have 1 explorer, you're going to have to roll the dice and possibly still fail and still draw the adventure card. Now once you've resolved the event card, whether it was a question mark or a book icon, and you handle where the book icon tells you to do, depending on the scenario, you're going to add this event card to your event track. Now if your event track is full, you're going to take the card that's on your far left and my far right here, and you're going to slide off the board, and then you're going to slide these 2 cards over like this to fill up the rest of the event card, and then you're going to have to suffer whatever bad event it tells you is going to happen at the bottom of the card. Now in this example, nothing bad is going to happen. But if this card were to slide off because the event cards aren't being handled by the players just because they're too overwhelmed with doing other things, you're going to start seeing a lot of bad things happen. This one's going to tell you to do whatever the book icon tells you to do. If this one moves off, it's going to tell you that each player is going to take 1 point of damage. If this one happens to move off, you're going to see that you're going to take 1 additional weather, which can cause you additional damage when the weather phase comes around. So you need to make sure that you're taking care of these event cards, because there can only be 2 event cards out at a time, and they're going to start sliding off if they're not handled. And finally, the last important thing to explain to you is the rule of unfulfilled demand. If a card or an action or event ever tells you to discard a resource and you do not possess that resource, somebody's going to take damage. Now if it's a card that you drew and it says you need to supply that resource and you're unable to supply that resource, that means you take the damage, the player who drew the card. Whereas opposed to if it's something like your weather space where you're unable to discard a wood or a food, then everybody's going to take damage. So that's very important. If you're unable to supply a resource that the game tells you to discard, people are going to start taking damage. Additionally, some cards are going to tell you that you need to have certain things to complete those cards. For example, some inventions will require you to have a prior invention. A good example would be for the shield. To build the shield, you have to have already built the invention of rope. If you haven't built the rope yet, you cannot build the shield yet, but once you've built the rope, you can start building the shield as long as you want to discard 1 wood. Now on these cards, if it shows you a resource such as wood or food, you have to discard that resource to create that item. If it shows you a weapon level, you just need to have that minimum level of the weapon track to do that action or complete that resource or handle that event card. And that's a slight minor detail, but it's very important. If a card shows you a food or a wood resource, you have to discard it. If it shows you a weapon level, you just need to have that minimum weapon level, but your weapon level is not going to go down. You just need to possess that minimum weapon level. I think I've explained enough to you how to explain Robinson Crusoe, and this has gone a little bit long, but there is a lot to this game, and I want to make sure you understand exactly how to play it. I'm going to go ahead and clean the game up, set it up for a quick 3-player game, go over a couple rounds, and hopefully I'll give you an idea of how Robinson Crusoe plays.